Maybe like right here. Thank you so much.
You already pushed it here?
I did. Assalamu alaikum. Inshallah, we're going to get started right away. Forgive me, I don't have the microphone today, so I'll have to try to project. For those who are listening online, inshallah, you can hear me. I do have a speaker for the laptop, so I hope that at least those who are listening online can hear me clearly, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise is due to God, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family, companions, and followers. We intend to learn and to teach, to remind and be reminded, to benefit and be benefited, to improve and be improved, and to encourage holding fast to the book of God and the way of his messenger, and to call unto guidance and to direct towards good, hoping for the countenance of God and his pleasure and his proximity and his reward. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family, companions, and followers. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum. It's nice to be with you all. Alhamdulillah. It's been a while. Inshallah, today we're going to cover the last installment of Surah An-Nazi'at, and next week we will start, inshallah, Surah Abasa. But I did want to ask about how's that homework going for you, for everyone, since the last time we met. Does anyone know what the homework was? No, that's okay. I know at least one person in this room knows what the homework was.
The homework was to continue with the 1% goal, increase working on this and try to achieve something closer to 1%. And if that's not working, then I have to think before for what you want to do.
Okay. So how's staying with this particular assignment been working out for those who have been staying with it?
1% and the goal. I've kind of been trying to do reduce the, like you said, change the goal and something more possible. Approximately 1%.
Yes.
Kind of subjective.
Yes.
But it's really been established.
Yes. Very much so. I agree. Any other thoughts?
It's really hard to fight the urge to do just 1% and not 100% one day and then like 0% the next day. So it's hard to be consistent.
That is very true. And but if you have, let's say you have the urge to do 100%, what if you just did 5 that day? Do you know what I mean? You might likely do 1 the next day. Do you know what I mean? So that's the so one thing that may help, because I actually think this is the kind of assignment it's like a life assignment that you keep in your back pocket, or front pocket, and something that may help. And I think this is something that, as I was also trying to do this assignment, something that really was a shift for me, alhamdulillah, was the 1% was actually not in the action. It was in the thought that motivated the action. That was my 1%. So when I hit a particular point of resistance, what is the thought that I'm going to remind myself of in that moment to help me get past that resistance? So that was my 1%, is hold on to this thought. And that thought is going to be different for, I think, different people. That's why I'm not sharing exactly what that thought was, because I think it's very, very specific to me and what's going to work with me. But it was a thought that I know that if or I shouldn't say I know, but so far it has helped me to overcome like the resistance. And that thought is, alhamdulillah, something that I think can, if there's something like that for each of us, and some of you journal, and sometimes you have things in your journals that are like your moments of epiphany. And sometimes we write them down, but we don't go back to it again. But if you are able to somehow go back and see what's that thing that has emerged for you that in the past has been something that it's not rocket science. It's actually very cliche. The thought for me is an extraordinary, like that's why I'm not saying it. It's like, no, because it's not going to work for other people in the same way that's going to work for me because it is specific to me. So the benefit I want to say is that it's like the journey of trying will expose to us what we need, and it's like your own soul will start to, inshallah. I mean, it does, it has our whole lives. Will teach you, this is what I need. This is what I need.
The journey to us will remind us what we need.
The journey, yeah. So the journey itself is going to bring out of you what you need to continue the journey. So that's why I want to. I'm not going to tell you what because if I say it doesn't work for you, you're like, that doesn't work. But it's not going to be. You will, inshallah, something will open up, and it's probably already opened up. I want to say like many times there is something that's been a game changer. It's simple, usually very simple, like not a rocket science. It's not rocket science, but it's the thing that works, So, but it was for me, the 1% was not forgetting what that thought is in the moment of resistance. Just return to that thought. No, like and that's and that thought will gets you over the next step. Gets you through the next step. Okay. And many adhkar are like that, by the way. Adhkar are like the formulas of dhikr that we're taught, whether it's hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil when feeling overwhelmed. But like saying it and really resting your heart in those words are transformative. I was just listening to Sheikh Wadid in the series that's on the Hikam that he has on SoundCloud. And he was also talking about this in terms of people, like a general formula for people. And this is like from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that when we face resistance, simply to say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah al-ali al-azim. Like that is, we know to say it, but like if he said, if you actually pause and you think about every single word that you're saying when you're saying it, it's transformative. It's not just a word you say or a reminder or a thought, but that remembrance of God is transformative enough to give you the strength that you need to do what's next. So this idea of there's no strength or power, there's no might or ability or capacity except through God. When we say that, and again, for many of us, we heard those words when our parents were upset or angry, because you're like, oh, they're trying not to be angry, but which is good. It's a better thing to say than something else, right? Like, alhamdulillah for that. But it's also like to actually do more, to do the thing that we can't do that we're trying to do. And that's just one example. But again, each one of us will have something that's like that. There's the general ones the Prophet prescribed, but there's also like you, Rabia, or you, sorry for saying your name online, or you, I'm just going to make up names, Khadija and Sarah and, Ibrahim and Ismail, just gonna, because it's keeping it anonymous. There's something that like is like a key to unlock what's the block, whatever that block is. But you won't get that key. The only way to get arrive at the key to you is to keep working with you. And then you will give it to you. I mean, it's a blessing from Allah, but it's coming from inside of you, inshallah. And like I said, many of you probably already have things like that already. It's just that we've overlooked it. It's something we've written in our notes, we've highlighted, we've circled. We're like, don't forget that. And 5 years pass and we forget it. And then we come back to it again 5 years later. And you're like, why did I forget that? You know, it's that simple, but it is it's treasure, alhamdulillah, when we find it. So we will, inshallah, go over the allegorical commentary of the verses that we took last time. Last time we did the verses 27 through 41 of Surah An-Nazi'at. So I'm going to share my screen.
Also, sorry, brothers, can you see this screen? Okay, perfect, because we can't get that one to work, unfortunately.
It's not attached to my laptop. Oh, no wonder. Here we go. Is that going to work or no?
Is that how you normally connect it?
I think it's a little bit longer. Oh, this is why. Okay, let me
Go out.
Yeah. Let me try this.
Press source and then remote to select connected source.
Wait, this is the wrong one. Let's try this one more time.
That's gonna be the first one.
Assalamu alaikum.
PC screen sharing.
I will ask my
So it didn't go onto the. If anyone has their iPhone, they can actually just go to if they want to scroll. What is it called? Qur'an.com on your phones. And
get the mic cord to connect to the TV.
I think this is it. Or no, this actually doesn't look like an HD.
That connects to your laptop, right?
I mean, I tried, but it's not connecting to the TV.
Okay, that's what I remember too, but for some reason it's not connecting to this. Yeah. But I'll
I think it's working now.
Oh, it's like.
Yeah. alhamdulillah.
Thank you, it's working.
Okay, for those who are following us online, we apologize for our technical difficulties. Okay. So, we're going to look at the allegorical commentary of Imam Ibn Ajiba from verses 34. Even though we covered from 27, his allegorical commentary starts from verses 34 to 41. So I'll read the translation and then we'll look at what he says. He mentions, but when the supreme, this is the verse of the Quran, verse 34. But when the supreme disaster comes to pass, by the way, this translation is a different one than the one that I normally use, but the meanings are very similar. But when the supreme disaster comes to pass, the day every person will remember all their striving, and hellfire will be displayed for all to see. Then, as for those who transgressed and preferred the fleeting life of this world, then hellfire will certainly be their home. And as for those who were in awe of standing before their Lord and restrained themselves from evil desires, paradise will certainly be their home. So we covered last time the actual commentary for these verses, but we are going to look at what he says. What is the allegory that this indicates or this can point to for us? So he mentions فَإِذَا جَاءَتِ الطَّامَةُ الْكُبْرَى, so when the great calamity befalls, or the supreme disaster comes to pass, that this is a jalali or sort of not beatific, but majestic manifestation. So this is, the great calamity is one of the, and when it comes to the Day of Judgment, for example, it's a majestic reality of a creation of God. But here he's not talking about specifically the Day of Judgment. He's talking about he calls it at-tajalli al-jalali, and this is like a manifestation, a majestic manifestation. And he says, on that day, man will remember that which they endeavored to. And here he's actually talking about that day as not as a bad day, right? It's like normally when we think about the Day of Judgment, it's like it's bad, not bad, but it's like it's scary, right? It strikes fear in our hearts because of the magnitude of all the things that are going to be happening on that day. But now he's talking about something in which a person, but the Day of Judgment, when we think about it, also very good things happen on that day. So for people who are going to paradise and people who are going to the highest levels of Jannah and people who are going to be under the shade of Allah and people who are going to be, even though everyone's going to not have clothing on, but certain people will actually be clothed in light, right? So they're going to be covered with a light that God gives them. So for some people on that day, they're actually not going to be scared or afraid or upset. For some people on a day that has that kind of magnitude, they will experience bliss, despite the fact that there is this heavy thing, right? They're going to be in God's pleasure. So he is now talking about a soul that is in this life experiences something majestic and powerful, but it's good for them. Okay, it's a manifest. It's a you could say it could be like a spiritual opening that a person experiences in a way that's very, very majestic. So there's like a gravity to it, but it is good for this particular soul. So he says, and on that day, this person will remember that which they endeavored, and that which the sa'a, meaning the sa'i of striving. And he says that which they endeavored to from the knowledge of Tawheed. And here he's not talking about like aqidah, technical definitions, what is Tawheed, but this person, they strived in the way of God so much that they had an actualized understanding of Tawheed. They had an actualized experience of Tawheed. And so he says, so whoever knows Allah in all things, so here, this is what he's talking about. So whoever knows Allah in all things, then they know him in all of the tajalliyat. And it's such, I keep using the Arabic because there's almost no English equivalent. Like, I don't even know what words can actually, other than like manifestations, that's the only thing I can come up with. Even when you look at like books of translation and stuff, it doesn't really get to the meaning. He says they know him in all the manifestations, whatever colors they take. And whoever falls short in knowing him in some things, they have actually rejected him in some things. Okay, I'm going to come back to it. Had they known Allah in all of his tajalliyat, they would not reject him in anything from them. So what is he referring to in terms of knowing Allah in all things? So a person can look at beautiful things in the world and be drawn to God, right? But how many people can look at like terrible things in the world? You know, and we're going through a difficult time as a community right now. And in those moments of terrible things, still be drawn to God and still in a good way, in a sound way, right? And so they experience this. He's describing a soul who they have endeavored. So here, the sa'i is referring to a spiritual struggle this person has undertaken to draw themselves closer to God. And so they have arrived at a place where they do experience God in everything. And then he compares this to the person who doesn't. They experience God in let's say some things, but not in other things. And so it's kind of like those areas where we might fall short in making this connection between like what we see in the world and the fact that it's part of God's divine decree, you know, and therefore there could be pain in it and suffering in it and things that God is not even pleased with in the sense of these things have been, but they're still part of his decree. So there's something in this that's also a manifestation that God has allowed to occur in the world, right? So I still must think well of this entire thing, right? Because I have to think well of my creator. And so, so this aspect of it, which is when he says, whoever falls short in knowing him in some things, they have actually rejected him in some things. And I want you to think about that in terms of like pain and suffering. Like in a lot of times people, again, in beautiful things, it's really easy to be like, wow, I'm connected to God through these beautiful things. But in things that are difficult or hard, it's like in those moments where sometimes people almost like look at that entire scenario as if God doesn't exist, as if he's not part of the equation, as if he's not the perfect Lord of all that exists, and that his wisdom does not encompass everything, and that, you know, so he's saying that if that's the way it is, when you're looking at that thing, then you've actually rejected God in those things. Not kufr per se, not disbelief, but you've like alienated your understanding of him from these other things. But for the one who has not done this kind of alienation, right? Like they know Allah in all of his tajalliyat, then he says they would not reject him in anything that is from them. I think that that's really, again, it's really something to hold on to when, especially in times of tribulation, and the kinds that, you know, like our human eyes are not meant to see every evil in the world at once, you know. We are potentially the first generation who can get live streamed images of things that were not live streamed in the past. Only the people who witnessed them, right? And the other people will just get the news of it. So just knowing that in these images are tests for those who are in front of those things. But when you're at a distance from them, it's in many ways, it's a different kind of test, meaning the person who sees it, they're in their own level of tribulation, but many times the people who actually are there, they don't lose their faith. They actually will increase in faith. Allah is testing these people, but he's also elevating them. And so their experience of this tribulation, as much as it's painful and tragic, it doesn't create a doubt in their iman in God. Like there's some kind of protection for them. But the person who's like 2,000 miles away, and they see that with their eyes, it can really test their faith. And so, so knowing that as bad as something looks and gets, and you know, in terms of the suffering of this life, to not alienate that from the reality of God, and don't alienate that from God's perfection. Don't alienate that from his wisdom. Don't alienate that from his love and his mercy and his justice and all of the beautiful names and attributes that we know about him, and know that that is a manifestation of some of those names and attributes, right? And so when we do that, then we get to know him even more. And then he says, وَبُرِزَتِ الْجَحِيمُ لِمَنْ يَرَى. And hellfire is made visible for the one who sees it. فَأَمَّا مَنْ طَغَى. And also, well, let me just do this one. He says here he's talking about not hellfire as in the afterlife. He's talking about the fire of being cut off from God is made apparent for the one who sees things, the life of this world, stuff, right? And they look at this world void of the remembrance of God. Again, alienating what they see in the world from the reality of God. They experience a level of bu'd or distance from God because they've alienated him from his own creation. They've alienated him from the life that they live. Imam al-Qushayri, he says that the fire of being veiled is manifested to the one who sees God as somehow separate from everything, for truly he is manifest in everything. And it reminds me of the verse, or not the verse, the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that everything in this world, the world and everything in it is cursed, mal'una, right? That's the word that's used in Arabic, mal'una. It's cursed, except for the remembrance of Allah, that which calls to it, the scholar and the student. So if everything is cursed, except for the remembrance of Allah in this world, and you're like, wow, that's such a bad world, right? It's all cursed. But what if but with the opposite is true, which is everything that is attached to the remembrance of Allah is then blessed, right? So, and faith doesn't mean that you go through something really terrible and you have to be at such a high level that you can be grateful to it. That's for people who are there, and that's a gift from God. But it means that you can go through something terrible, and even though you don't like it, right? There's pain and suffering in it, you can be patient and just say that this is a test from God, right? Or inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, that truly from God we come, into him we belong, or to him we return. So attaching the remembrance of God to this world allows us to have a blessed experience of this world. Even if it's not an easy one, it will still be blessed. Removing the remembrance of God to this world is what makes it cursed. And then he says that what calls to it. So there are things that call us to the remembrance of God, all the different ways that we like draw closer to him in our deen. And then he says the scholar and the student, even more like concrete, which is the people who teach us how to, who draw closer to Allah. And so connecting this back to the fire of being veiled from God. Now, he's talking about the fire of being distant. And there's two ways that this, I think, affects believers, like I should say Muslims, and people who are struggling in their faith, even though they believe. So one of them is that and we have to not fall into it, because it is what other people fall into, because they don't have a holistic understanding of how they experience God. So one of them is despair, is a loss of hope, and a feeling that everything that you see, the math that you see in the world, the equations you see in the world, they actually are the causes and the effects and you know what I mean? Like if you believe in just the worldly equations, you're going to have a lot to feel loss of hope for. There's a lot to despair in, right? But if a person has their faith in God, they don't have their faith in what they see with their eyes. They have their faith in who they don't see with their eyes. But they know that he is the cause of all causes, right? Musabbib al-asbab. Then they put their hope in the one who has total control over everything. Like the stuff that people say, like, how are we going to do this? Well, it's easy for God to do this. So it may be hard for us if we rely on our efforts and our energies. It doesn't mean that we don't work. We always work. But we don't rely on our efforts. We rely on God. So that's one of them, is that despair and loss of hope. The other way that this happens for people who are Muslim, they believe in Allah, we believe in the religion, but there's there's an alienation from the world that I live in and what I see from the reality of God. what that leads to in terms of another way that that's taken in terms of being distant from God is an attachment to the material world. It's greed, personal enjoyment, my own issues. The least evil of it is someone who's totally self-absorbed and cannot see past the circle of their own world, right? That's the least of that. The worst of it is obviously the people who their greed gets to such an amount that they oppress and take, and they become the people that cause the despair in others, right? So, again, there is a fire in this type of greed. There's a spiritual distance from God. There's a suffering in that kind of greed in and of itself. And it starts off with in what people perceive to be enjoyment. And then those things they don't enjoy anymore. They keep, okay, here I went to this, they start off as a foodie. I'm not trying to blame any foodies here. But it's like, that's not enough. Okay, now, well, what about substance abuse? What about alcohol? What about drugs? What about whatever, addictions and all kinds of addictions? And so eventually there's not anything else left to do. So there's crime. Where does the thrill come from? Okay, if it's not going to be crime, then what next? Right? So it's its own suffering. It's its own, and it doesn't, in the chasing and the pursuit of whatever the pleasure is, they actually like lose the ability to feel real happiness. And that is a fire. And may Allah protect all of us from that. And so when this life or this world and everything in it is cursed, right? If you think about the one who has total loss of hope and despair, I'm trying to remember where I heard this recently. I don't remember where. That despair or depression, it's the word that's used, and despair and depression are not the same thing. Depression is a medical term, but one of the things that was said about depression, again, which is not despair. Despair is like a total loss of hope. They're connected, but not the same. Is the inability to imagine alternative outcomes or realities or possibilities leads to, it's one of the indicators of depression. That this person can't see anything being any better than it is. It's not going to get better. This is the best it's going to get. A feeling of feeling stuck when someone says, "Why don't you try this? Why don't you try that?" They say it's not going to help. That's not going to help. Nothing's going to help, right? So, this is significant because in the world that we're in as Muslims who live in this society and are trying to better things and allow people to imagine different outcomes and different possibilities, is we should never magnify the evil to the extent that a person thinks we can't do anything about it. Even if the evil is big. It shouldn't magnify it to the extent that you think I'm powerless or that no one can do anything, right? Because then you've now created the reality where everyone's like, we're stuck. There's no other options. It's like, but we believe in God. Like, we believe in Allah. We believe that things can change. Things will change. So, why do I think faith leaders have, even historically in this country, have been the most potent in leading social change is because they really believe in God and they really believe that things can change by the will of God, and that hope is what's kept alive because of the relationship with God, and because whatever they're touching in terms of the means of activism and the means of social change, they're not alienated or separate from their understanding that their exchanges in the world are and their transactions are actually with God and not with the intermediaries in between. Right. So one of the things that like has been a reflection for people who were from the Black church, for example, in the civil rights movement and with Black Lives Matter, is that a lot of them that got involved in Black Lives Matter have reflected on, well, especially the older leaders, that their involvement in civil rights was deeply connected to their life at the church. So Black Lives Matter for them, it wasn't called Black Lives Matter, the civil rights movement it came out of the church. It came out of houses of worship. It came out of congregations. It came out of people who are in prayer all the time together. And so, so that has a different flavor than the same desire, the same kind of people seeking the same social outcome, but they're doing it outside the church. And many of them, the reason why they're doing it outside the church is they experienced some kind of like bad thing in their religious institution or whatnot. So they were disillusioned with it. And so now they wanted to work for that social change, but it's now divorced from the reality of God. If you read many of the works, and this is a reflection from a Black Muslim civil rights leader who said, I read their books, and he was talking about when the era when Black Lives Matter was huge. I read what was being written, and he said, the thing that made me feel so bad for them is how much despair you're reading into the words. They have despaired in their own cause. So, and he's like, that is not the way, this is a Muslim civil rights leader saying that that's not how it was when, like, in the time of Dr. King, for example, right? Because it's connected to their belief in God. So there's definitely something that we risk as Muslims if we, it doesn't mean that you don't work with everyone. We work with everyone, but our approach to like success and victory and a free Palestine and is going to come from not alienating any aspect of our journey from the reality of God and like a good opinion of Allah and you know the verses, I mean, that He Himself, that we have as revelation from Him that talk about oppression in the Qur'an. They're there for us. And if we don't have them, if we start to feel, for example, like really overwhelmed to the extent where you feel like, again, that stuck place where there's nothing we can do. This is that place where we learn from the faith of the Palestinians themselves, who say that the rockets may be over our heads, but Allah is over their rockets. And that's like, I mean, like literally the faith of a Palestinian child. Like that they're teaching us how to weather the storm from a distance because they're weathering it up front. And that's subhanAllah, that a child did not alienate the rocket from the reality of God. Do you know what I mean? That's a faith that is a gift from God. We ask for faith like that. And again, to not have that kind of faith is its own suffering, right? Because then you start to see things just according to what your eyes see, and there's so much more happening. I know that's a tangent that was not in the notes, but we will continue.
That's something that I feel we see a lot with like current social movements, not just Palestine in general, where a majority of like people who have become voices, it's secular. So that's like majority. But I wouldn't say I actually think it's really interesting because I even saw this yesterday, like this person who was like non-binary, married to like a man, they have a child, but like they made a post about how they have like a child and like the concept of bringing a child into this world and stuff like that. And it was actually the fundamental core aspect of it was hope. And I thought that was really interesting because I feel like I'm seeing even within some of the secular leadership, I feel like the people who are the most in the work, there is a lot of hope. Even amongst the secular leadership, which is really interesting because I always take a step back and I'm like, where is that coming from? Yeah. Like it's genuinely like here, like I know where it comes from. And even with, I guess, what we're seeing, like we've talked about this, like the students with encampments and stuff, like what's fueling them? You know, like 95% of them are not Muslim. You know, like what's fueling them? And so it's been interesting to kind of like see that, and also as Muslims, how do we position ourselves within, you know, that, because I think personally, I don't know, there's not really a question, it's just more like a reflection around, like, I feel like people's fitras are trying to move towards what is right, but they don't have like, you know,
the framework.
Yeah. And so there's like aspects that are accurate and aspects that are maybe a little bit not super accurate. And so it's interesting because I'm like, it's I think a lot of these social movements have there's a lot, I think there's a lot that I find that is not aligned, and I feel like I see a lot of Muslims being like stepping back because of it. We see this on college campuses all the time, that MSAs do not get involved with encampments because of like XYZ and whatever. But then at the same time, I'm like, there's so much potential because a lot of these folks, like these non-Muslims, they're searching and looking, and I think like the husbands inspired them, and it's really interesting. I wonder like how much of it it's from Allah, you know, it has to be from Allah, and like what is this, how does this relate to their journeys and stuff like that. But
No, absolutely. I mean, at the encampment, there was a I won't say which college campus, but a family member of mine was at one of the encampments almost every day, and they said that when they looked around at the encampment, they saw that people at the encampment who literally had nothing else in common except for Palestine.
Yeah.
And they're like, nothing else would bring all these people on any other social or political issue, they would not be on the same page about it. But when it came to the issue of Palestine, they were like clear as day, which I actually think is a blessing, a huge blessing, like a huge blessing that there's that on this issue, people can see, the people who are there can see right for being right and wrong for being wrong. And that's definitely a gift from God. Like alhamdulillah, like we witnessing that as like Muslims or like anyone witnessing it, seeing that there's a clarity that certain people have on this issue is a huge blessing. And that these different categories of people who are involved that are secular, and they may still believe in God, by the way, and they may still believe in some form of like spiritual reality or higher thing.
Yeah.
But I want to say that it's like if hope is there, that's a good indication, inshallah, of something like continuing, because you won't be able to do it if you don't have hope. And for the Muslims, though, I want to say like that maybe a difference would be that like our hope is not necessarily that we will see all the results of our work in our own lifetimes. Our hope is in the fact that God has promised us that you do the work, I deliver, I will deliver this, but it's going to be on God's timeline, right? So there's like if it happens in my lifetime, alhamdulillah. If it doesn't happen in my lifetime, I'm going to make sure and pass this down to my kids so they do it. Like it's about like fulfilling sort of a trust from with God or from God. So I want to say the paradigm is a little bit different. Still yet, alhamdulillah, it's an issue like because it's Masjid al-Aqsa, and I think that there's all kinds of miracles that I think we are going to see in relationship to this particular struggle. But as it relates in general to things related to social justice, if you look at, for example, there's a nice documentary. It's called The Weather Underground. I don't know how we chanced upon it. I think it was one of my classes at UCSD, and it was a group of people who were activists in the 70s, 60s and 70s, and where they are today. And most of them have stopped, and they were busy for decades. And they did things that were not good. They also did things that were not good. Let me just put that disclaimer out there. But in the interviews, and I don't want to ruin the whole thing for you, but one thing that really does come up is they've lost a sense of, is there any hope? Like we did all of that, and today we're saying we don't know if any of it did anything, or they recall their memories with like a fondness in those times when they were doing what they were doing. But when they're looking at the same issues that they were working on back then, today they feel like since certain things have not changed, you can hear the despair in their sort of like their look back at it all. And part of why I feel they feel that is because they kind of alienated their efforts and what was happening and what is meant to happen from the reality of God, right? Like, because if you are only working for the results in this life, if you don't see them in your own lifetime, it'll be like all my efforts went to waste. All of it was, what was all of that for? And maybe you tell your kids, don't do what I did. I wasted my time. Go and have a good time. Go and enjoy your life. You don't have to be involved in all these things. I tried, I did that. Don't, you know what I'm saying? Like it's going to create a very different, like it's something that the long term of it will expose what it really is. Yeah. But on the issue of Palestine, I'm just going to say thank you to God for the gift. You know what I mean? Like in terms of the fact that so many people can see clearly from all walks of life when it comes to the Palestinians. And they can't see clearly on other things, but on this, they can all see it. Alhamdulillah, that's a blessing. I mean, it is, to us, it's very, very obvious and very clear, but you'd be, when people are getting like very basic truths wrong in the world, then, like it's still a blessing that they get some of these things right. So here we have, alhamdulillah, someone who mentioned being at the encampments, and they just wanted to say that they believe that we as Muslims have a lot to give to the encampments to lift the struggle to Allah, and this person saying if we can merge Islam into our approach of activism, then in a way that pleases Allah. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely agree. And I think, alhamdulillah, like for the Muslims that have been involved, they are very much inspired by their faith. That at least the ones that I've been in touch with and things like that. So I'm not, this is not meant to criticize anyone. But really meant to say, like, we have a gift. We've been given something. We've been given something really, really, really precious that a lot of people are looking for. And it refuels our tanks. It puts everything back in place. If we're feeling a little bit off, it will put us back, make us well again. I mean, we have the secret sauce, like, and other people don't have it, and they're striving and they're getting exhausted. And they're trying to do all kinds of things, but they don't have our secret sauce. And so, we need to like live it, inshallah, as much in whatever way we can, but also appreciate it, so that if we see someone who like is trying to do something and they're in this distance, they're in this suffering, inshallah, with wisdom, with hikmah, we're able to offer that to them as well. He mentions, he said, and as for whoever transgresses and follows their desires and preferred the life of this world and being busy with it, such that they turn away from approaching Allah, then he says the fire is their abode. And then he says Jahimul Hirman an Mushahadat al-Rahman. So it is the fire of being prevented from the witnessing of the Most Merciful. Right? So this witnessing of God as the Most Merciful is a joy. It's a gift. It's a pleasure. And he's saying the person who has chosen the life of this world, they are choosing for themselves the fire of being prevented from this beautiful experience they could have. They thought this world was somehow more beautiful than the witnessing of God, and it's not. The witnessing of God is the most beautiful thing that one can have. And so he says about وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ, but as for the one who they were in awe of standing before their Lord, and so they restrained themselves from evil desires. He says this is 3 different levels. The first one is the one who was in awe of standing in front of, it says qiyam rabbihi bil ashya, like that they would stand in front of God. It says with things, meaning with the idea that they have dissociated things from God, right? Kind of what I was just talking about. No problem. So they don't want to stand in front of God with anything in between them and God, all right? Because everything they have reconciled, basically all the things that they see in the world, all the things they experience in the world, with their faith in the reality of God. So he says qiyam rabbihi bil ashya. Then the second one, he says, is the one who, what they are in awe of is the idea of standing in front of Allah, and with the things that they have in this world, and that Allah is going to look at their relationship with these things. So they're afraid of, like, when Allah looks at what he associates what he has with Allah, but he's afraid of this examination that happens. And the third, he says, is the level is the one who has the awe of standing in front of Allah. He says between his hands, غَدًا لِلْحِسَابِ, like tomorrow for the day of resurrection, for the accounting. And he says the first category of people, the people who don't want there to be, when they have awe of the idea of standing in front of God, says like bil ashya is like, so it's again, the ba has like 9 different meanings in Arabic, but like by things or through things, they because they want all of what they have experienced in this world to be reconciled, or a for them, something that is part of their understanding of Tawheed. Like it's not separate. This is not separate from my belief in God's reality or the oneness of God. So the first category, he calls them Ahlul Mushahada. These are people who witness God in everything. The second category, he says, Ahlul Muraqaba. These are people who they feel like God is always watching them. One is watching God. That's the first category. Second category is feeling watched. All right, Ahlul Muraqaba. And then the third, he says, is Ahlul Muhasaba, and that's like the vast majority of Muslims. It's a good category, but it's the people who hold themselves accountable. And those are the ones who, again, when it comes to this verse, they're talking about they have awe for the day of judgment and the fact that they're going to be held accountable on that day. So everything he says that distracts a person from God, وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى, is what some people would remove from their beings. It's not just like vain desires that don't offer good deeds. It's whatever distracts a person from God. And he says, and it hardens the heart from remembering its master. And he says, so if they remove these things from from the nafs and from what the nafs desires, then paradise is their abode. And this paradise is the gardens of knowing him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the one who leaves allowed things. So وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى is not just the one who leaves the haram. They leave anything that's a distraction from God. They leave anything that would harden their heart from the remembrance of God. Like they're just so about God that it's not about halal and haram. It's what takes me away from him. Then that and that person, they say what they experience is in this life. It's yes, the next life is paradise, but in this life they experience the gardens of knowing him. And this is because they left allowed things to know him more, to be closer to him. And then he says, for the one who they did that, but it was only according to things that are prohibited, then they also experience a garden in this life, and he calls it the gardens of golden ornaments or zakharif, like decorations, meaning there's beauties, there's spiritual beauties they experience in this life, but it's not obviously the same level as the one who has higher levels of knowing God. And he gives the example of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ when he said that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, Aslama shaytani, my shaitan became Muslim. And became and you know, Aslam is also surrender, right? So my shaitan surrendered. He said, I'm not gonna, you know, whisper bad things. I'm only gonna do things that are right. And it was said that this also happened to Umar's radiallahu anhu, that initially say if Umar radiallahu anhu would take a path, shaitan would take a different one. If they because of fear of Umar, because of the strength of his faith. But they also say about him that his shaitan also became Muslim. And so the one who fights the pulls of their lower nafs, this can happen. And so Imam Ibn Ajib, he says, no one is safe from the hawa, again, the pull of the desires, except the prophets and some of the Siddiqeen. So like the highest, like Abu Bakr Siddiq, right? Like that's the greatest companion because he's a Siddiq, the people who are really true to God. So, and then Imam Ibn Ajib says it's not all of them. So Siddiqeen is already a high category. Like, and he says from the Siddiqeen, some of them will be safe from the pull of desires, but not all of them. And then he says the only ones who are safe from the hawa are the ones who require from themselves. And here he's talking about the nafs. So they require from their nufus adab. They require from their nufus adab. Now, this has to be decoded. What does that mean to require from your nafs adab? So your nafs, you can call your nafs not to do bad things or partake in bad things. And you can, but it will still, for example, recognize bad things, right? Like it might still want them. So how do you continuously work on it so it no longer wants those things and only wants the good things? And then even on top of wanting the good things, it's more than adab is to require adab from your nafs is like your nafs has to be courteous with God, you know, like it's an excellence from the nafs, you know. That's not an easy thing. That's why he says like some of the Siddiqeen have it, not even all of them. It's like I'll give you an example. You see someone and you're in a gathering and there's food, right? And someone comes in there and they just start stuffing their face with like whatever, the food in front of everyone. Like they grab it from the middle of the plate. They just do something that's really like vulgar and bad, right? And everyone looks at them and they kind of like think or feel a certain kind of way, right? The one who alzamahu nafsahu ala al-adab, Like they have told their nafs, you're not allowed to feel a certain kind of way about that person. You can feel a certain kind of way about that action, but you're going to love that person and you're going to be excellent to that person. You're going to be good and you're not just going to be good to them because you're trying to like pander to them in some kind of way. You're going to be good to them believing in their good. Like you're not doing them a favor. You know what I'm saying? Like they're doing ta'deeb on that aspect. They're not going to see themselves as doing that person a favor. They're going to see themselves as when they are humble and serving that person and being kind to that person, they're not trying to be humble. They actually are. They will actually see that person as like a worthwhile like member of the community. They will not judge them by that action. You know what I'm saying? So like it's all kinds of I'm giving you just an example, but they're training their nafs, and it's not the word is not even training, it's alzamahu. So you made it lazim. You must. You don't get to be outside of this level of adab with people in your inner self. This is not a person who would ever vent. They have nothing to vent about because alzamahu nafsuhu ala al-adab. Yeah, that's why some of the Siddiqeen get it. So even if, okay, like I'm not saying this so that we all feel despair and feel like no hope in ourselves. I'm saying this that like alhamdulillah, we know a category like this exists in the world, that there are people who have arrived here. This religion works, it's and it does create the most beautiful people. Alhamdulillah. But that this is like you could say a signpost along the spiritual path, is that their inner selves have adab. And they've maintained it that way. The way they got there is because they said this is a requirement. I'm treating for my nafs, which is an unseen reality. I'm going to make this a wajib, a requirement for my nafs to have adab. And they do that to such an extent that it actually becomes that way. So he says the one who does this, Imam Ibn Ajiba mentions, the one who does this, they require adab from their nafs. They can soar to the heights of the skies of like unseen realities, or to the earths of like, the fortunes of this world he says, with permission and righteousness that's established and solid, and a steadfastness where they are sound in their faith and their certainty. And he says, وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنْهُمْ. So this is a person, he's saying that if they saw, like if you unveiled the heavens to them, and they saw all the beautiful things of the world that's in the unseen world in terms of angels and other realities in the world that exist alongside the world that we see, and you took them down to the lowest part of the earth where they saw all the treasures of this world, they would be unfazed. Like either one is not going to take them off of the solid certainty of faith that they have and the guidance that they have, because that's the strength of that's the fortitude of their faith. Now, most people, if they saw anything from the unseen realities, they kind of go a little bit crazy, right? They'd be like, oh my God, and if similarly, if you showed them the treasures of this world and like the fortunes they could have, they could easily lose themselves. Like in either end, people would trip and fall. They're saying this is a soul that is not going to trip and fall. Their faith will be solid and steady. And then he says, well, qalilun mahum, like very few are such people. May Allah help us to meet such people. May Allah help us to benefit from such people. And if he deems us worthy, may Allah help us to become such people. But it's nice to know that this exists. These realities do exist in the world, alhamdulillah. And we have biographies of the Sahaba that kind of indicate to us how they can look like in different people. What time is it? Okay. I need to finish in the next 5 minutes. So we did not get to, let me just quickly go to the last verses of today. And I'll give the assignment. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسألونك عن الساعة أيان مرساها فيما أنت من ذكراها إلى ربك منتهاها إنما أنت منذر من يخشاها كأنهم يوم يرونها لم يلبثوا إلا عشية أو ضحاها. They ask you, O Prophet, regarding the hour, when will it be? But it is not for you to tell its time. That knowledge rests with your Lord alone, Your duty is only to warn whoever is in awe of it. On the day they see it, it will be as if they had stayed in the world no more than one evening or its morning. Here, the verse is said to refer to the idolaters of Mecca, and in terms of they ask you concerning the hour. And they didn't ask this question to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ because they actually wanted to know when the hour was. They would say it to mock him. And that's mentioned in the tafsir of Imam Alusi and Imam al-Qurtubi. So like be aware of this particular kind of quality of like not for just for ourselves, but it's not it's something we would train our children against. It's a tendency, which is to ask questions not for the sake of seeking an answer, but maybe for the sake of, sometimes people do this in classrooms, teachers in Islamic schools know. They ask the questions out of mockery or out of just trying to have fun with the person that they're asking the question of, instead of actually seeking to understand. And this can happen on any number. It's like, someone can ask you, for example, very politely, why do you wear hijab? And they really want to know why. And someone else can ask you, well, why do you wear that thing on your head anyway? Right? So the second one is not interested really in the answer. So this is how the Meccans were coming to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ about the Day of Judgment. When shall it come? And then there's also one of the ways that it's understood in the Ayyana Mursaha is that it can really be translated as when shall it birth? When will it be born? And so some of the Mufassirin, Imam al-Qurtubi mentions this, use this as a metaphor to imply that it is near at hand, meaning the earth or the world is like pregnant with the Day of Judgment. And when the Day of Judgment happens, it is birthed, right? It's born. So this, the word is, the word that's used in Arabic is used, it indicates nearness, like it's going to be not far from now. Imam Ibn Ajiba, he says that, it's asking when will its end or the end of this life arrive? And he says it's like a boat which sets out into the harbor. And then the question is, when is this boat going to get parked? And he says the life of this world is like that. And I know Sada Yasmin Mujahid always talks about how like this world is like kind of like the ocean, and your boat, you're trying not to get the dunya into your boat, right? So this idea, this illusion of a boat stopping, and is actually poignant because our Day of Judgment begins at death. Right? So when will it be is of no consequence, because once we die, the beginning of our, judgment starts. It's not the Yom al-Qiyamah itself, obviously, but it's what the angels will ask us. It's, the beginning of that entire journey. What hast thou to do with mentioning it? This verse can also be understood as either Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he's not supposed to speak about it because he doesn't know, so don't answer them, right? So where it says Fima anta min dhikraha, it's not for you to tell its time, or it's a reference to those who contend that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had no business mentioning the hour, as if this is what they are saying. It's not for you to talk to us about the hour since you don't know when it is. So since you don't know when it's going to transpire. And for that second category, it's like, again, that question comes in a mocking tone. Why are you telling us about something if you're not going to answer all our questions about it, right? If you can't explain everything, don't say anything at all mentality, right? And we, in a lot of cases in our lives, don't benefit from all the information of a particular thing. There's an amount of information that we benefit from, and beyond that, we don't. It could actually harm us. So Allah reveals to us what is of use to us and of benefit to us, and what's not of use to us. The humility for someone to be able to be like, you don't actually need to know that. That's not important for you to know. What you do need to know is this, this, and this. And that's why you're getting the reminder. And then the other aspect of this lesson, or a lesson to take from this verse, is this idea that don't ask questions to those who are not eligible to give a proper answer. And so the Prophet Muhammad is not the master of the Day of Judgment. Allah is the master of the Day of Judgment. Why are you asking him that question? That quality of like, I'm going to ask this thing. So I don't go to, for example, a dentist for medical advice. Like that needs to go to a surgeon. I don't go to a mufti for something that I actually need to go to a therapist for, right? So there's like confusing things. This quality of asking the wrong person for an answer is, you could say, like, it's one of the first ways that like or lessons in etiquette that we can take from it. And again, why are they asking you, messenger of God, when it's not from your affair? You are a warner. Allah is Maliki Yawmiddin. Allah is the king of the day of judgment. And to thy Lord is knowledge of the end thereof. And here, well, I was going to say, like, just one aspect of this is people have an issue when it comes to accepting that their mind has limitation. And that God is greater than all of their limitations. So you want to know something that God's not going to tell you. And there's an agitation with the fact that why is someone giving me this limitation? The one that is giving you this limitation, you can't fathom him. You can't see him. You can't, like we say that we don't ascribe space and time to God, right? Because he is above space and time. He is, was, and always will be. That's not something the mind can grasp. The fact that he doesn't take up space, that's not something the mind can grasp. So this acceptance of the fact that we are limited and we're going to be told by the one who is not limited, like what we can handle, is part of what allows one person to believe, because they can submit to that creator who is unlimited and they can accept their own limitation. So, what was that? Well, in the Quran, like when Allah says, these verses that talk about like the day of judgment, and that he doesn't tell people in the Quran like exactly when the day of judgment is, right? So he says, unto thy Lord is knowledge of the end, right, thereof. Only God knows about the hour. In other places in the Quran, Surah Al-A'raf, they question you about the hour, when will it be? Say, knowledge thereof lies only with my Lord. None save he shall manifest it at its proper time. Heavy shall it weigh upon the heavens and the earth. It shall not come upon you but suddenly. Right? So these are also mentioned, these verses are mentioned in the Quran. Also in Hadith Jibreel, when the angel Jibreel comes to the Prophet Muhammad in the form of a man, and he asked the Prophet, knowingly he asked the Prophet, when is the hour? Right? So and the Prophet Muhammad answers him and says, the one asking has no more knowledge of it than the one being asked. So it's the one question that, like, the other questions the Prophet answered, that one he said, no, you don't know and I don't know. And then, you know, he mentions what some of the signs are. Why? Because the signs are going to be a benefit for us to know. The exact timing is not, it's not in the realm of creation for us to know that, because God is the master of the day of judgment. Sayyidah Aisha, she mentions that the Prophet Muhammad was asked about when the hour was a lot, like by the Quraysh, like all the time, like when is it going to be, when is it going to be, when is it going to be, until these verses were revealed. Thou art but a warner for whosoever fears it. إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُنذِرٌ مَن يَخْشَاهَا. And so he's a warner. His warning is going to help the person who has awe of the hour. It's not going to help people who don't care about it. Right? So in order to benefit from the warning, you have to actually have awe for the hour. You have to have a sense of, this is a day of great magnitude, and I want to not end up on the wrong side of things on this day. So his warning is going to help the person who has that sense within them. If someone does not have that sense within them, they won't benefit. So in the Quran, we have so much about, like, almost you can't turn a page of the Quran without some reference to the Day of Judgment. That's what it feels like when you read Quran. And so it's as if the entire Quran is to develop and cultivate and wake the person up to have fear of the Day of Judgment, so they can benefit from the warning that's coming to them about the Day of Judgment. So the prophets warn and they also bring glad tidings. That's reiterated throughout the Quran. And but people always want the prophets to kind of be more like soothsayers or fortune tellers. Like, what's going to happen in this year? What's going to happen then? Give me the exact timing of this, and will my marriage last? And like, you know what I mean? And there's all kinds of questions. Is my child going to be this? And it's like, no, they're warners. They're people to help you. And so in the Surah Al-Ahqaf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs the Prophet to say, I am no innovation among the messengers, and I know not what will be done with me or with you. I only follow that which has been revealed unto me, and I am not but a clear warner. So the Prophet Muhammad is the one who warns and prepares us for our meeting with God, right? Guides us. How do we have he's there to help us, but he's telling everyone, I'm not God. So a lot of your questions, I cannot answer them, and I'm the most knowledgeable of mankind. Now think about that fact that people treated the Prophet Muhammad that way. Sometimes people treat religious leaders this way too. They're not prophets, but they do the same thing. They want like fortune-telling answers, like, should I take this job? Should I not take this job? And unfortunately, there are people who would give, what's the word? Like answers without knowledge, right? So if someone answers that question, they don't have knowledge of what they're talking about. They're hurting the person that's coming to them, right? But if they give like advices about how to like understand it or prepare, whatever it is the job going to, is it halal income? You know what I mean? Like they prod that person to think about it and make a good decision for themselves. Then again, they're not anything more than a warner. They're not the one like looking into a crystal ball and saying anything, right? That's the fortune telling. The day they see it, it will be as if they had tarried but an evening or the morning thereof. And here, most commentators say that this verse is actually not about the life of this world, which I was shocked when I read that. Because I always thought it was about the life of this world. That كأنهم يوم يرونها لم يلبثوا إلا عشية أو ضحاها. That it will be as if they stayed. And here, even in this translation, it says in the world. It doesn't say in the world in the Arabic. لم يلبثوا. It will be as if they tarried, but an evening or a morning. So he mentions that, and this is the study of Quran, says most commentators say that this verse means that the time in the grave will seem short before the day of judgment. After the person has passed away, and think about how many lifetimes a person is in a grave until the day of judgment, right? Like centuries upon centuries upon centuries upon centuries upon centuries, that the life of the grave is going to seem like a morning or an afternoon to them. So what is the life of this world? A breath, a moment, a minute, a second, you know? Most commentators say it's about the life of the grave. Others say it's an implication that the life of this world will seem as if it was only an hour in comparison to the experience of the hereafter. It's also mentioned by Ibn Kathir and Imam al-Qurtubi. Also in this instance, the word duha, which means morning time, like when you pray duha, is said to refer to the time of the time period of the worldly life in the eyes of the people when they see the hereafter. So when you think about duha time, like Fajr to duha is a short period of time, right? So in the beginning, it says like either ashiyatan, like an evening or a morning, the whole life of this world being like that. And this is why like the hour is so stressed, because this will be over before we know it. And what happens on the day of judgment is going to matter for eternity. So to heed that particular warning. And I had the ishara for this prepared, but we don't have time for it because we need to pray Maghrib. And I'll just say that for the assignment for this week, it was to continue that 1% assignment, but I was going to read something. Again, we don't have time to read it. It was connected to the ishara that we started with. And it is, I want to say that attaching your, like maybe a 1% goal for yourself in connecting something that you may feel somehow, this thing that you are experiencing in the world, you have subconsciously, not consciously, but subconsciously somehow alienated it from the reality of God, bridging that gap and see what we can do to bridge that gap. I think the most obvious test for many people right now is what's happening in Gaza for our brothers and sisters in Palestine, but it may not be that. Sometimes that's the thing that people get completely right. The hardest test is the one that they see very clearly and they remember Allah very, you could say appropriately through that. And but it could be something else that is much less than that, like this other thing. That's usually, you know, that it's not in the right place because it's causing an issue. So whatever that issue is, remove the alienation from that subject, from that thing in your life, and its connection to like the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if by 1%. And whatever I said that was beneficial is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever I said that's wrong and mistaken is from myself and shaitan. I'll just quickly close the dua. I'm going to just do the English. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Oh God, give us success to attain what you love and are pleased with. Make us amongst your felicitous servants. Allow us to die on the statement of guidance. Teach us what will benefit us and give us the success to act upon what you have taught us. Make that in which we are engaged pure and devoted to your noble face. Ameen, O Lord of the worlds. O God, make this gathering of ours a gathering enveloped in mercy, and our parting thereafter a parting of our sins purged and forgiven, not one of us wretched or deprived. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and upon his noble family, companions, and followers. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum.